Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Fox 12 Now Desk. I'm Greg Nibbler here with Fox 12 Oregon. Appreciate everybody joining us wherever you are. And we're going to have kind of a fun topic here to cover right now. You know, if you're from the metro area, anywhere around here, you know, we have a lot of options for mass transportation. You've got MAX lines, you got bus lines, you got a tram line. But we don't have something that takes advantage of that giant river that's running through town, and that is a ferry line. And there is a company that's looking to change that. You may have heard from them before, but we're going to be talking all about that right now. The idea of having a ferry running through Portland, taking people all over the place. So we're going to be joined right now by Susan Bladholm, who is from Frog Ferry, to talk about everything that you have going with this. Susan, thank you very much for joining us. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
Greg.
that. And I want to kind of get into this and just kind of discuss, you know, maybe the origins of this, why it is that you think we need a ferry, and really what Frog Ferry is.
Sure. Well, people that have been around Portland for a while know that we used to have ferries here in the region, up and down, connecting Portland and Vancouver, as well as out on the Willamette River. So when you hear Boone's Ferry Road or Taylor's Ferry Road or Canyon Road, those all were thoroughfares coming up from ferry stops. And it was actually about 100 years ago, actually the same month that the I-5 bridge opened, the ferry stopped running. And so today, ferries are just a best practice for river cities. They're actually very economical from an infrastructure perspective because you have the river. You're not building out roads and rails and having to maintain them. You're not having to displace neighborhoods or stores. The river is already there. So you're essentially paying for a bus that's on the water and essentially building out bus stops, which are the docks. So, and then there's just been a tremendous advancement in the technology. So for electric or hybrid ferries, both here in the US as well as globally.
Yeah, I mean, you see ferries in a lot of other cities. It seems like it's, you know, not that uncommon for cities with a lot of rivers. And you mentioned that that used to be something here. So what was the reason behind it going away here? Like, why did that stop?
Well, 100 years ago, we had cars and the advancement of cars, and everyone got really excited about that. And we really weren't concerned about climate. We weren't really worried about community resilience or a new earthquake. We had these newfangled things called cars, and that was like the shiny new thing that we had around. So obviously, a lot of things have changed, and a lot of things have changed in the ferry business. So when people think about really big or really big polluting ferries, that's really a thing of the past. And we're looking at smaller, some call foot ferries, passenger ferries. So it's not for cars. And also really encouraging the use of bicycles and connecting these ferries. It's basically an additional puzzle piece. So you can still take light rail, you can still take your bus, you can still take light rail. We want you to use those to connect to the ferries.
So adding it into, you know, that infrastructure that's already there, is there a lot of that in place? I want to get into the actual ferry itself in a bit, but speaking of the infrastructure, you know, you mentioned combining this with using MAX, using bikes. How much infrastructure would need to be built in order to incorporate these in?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we've actually mapped out 10 different ferry dock locations from Vancouver, Washington over to Oregon City. We, Frog Ferry, didn't do that. We really have relied on our local transit planners at Metro and PBOT to tell us here's where we have the greatest need. Also, where we already currently have infrastructure, where we have connections to and from the docks, because that's very, very critical, or we have great opportunities for providing those connections to the docks. And so 7 of those docks already exist of the 10. But you can look at a place like Vancouver, Washington with the interstate bridge replacement. How will that new bridge impact the existing dock that's right there? Vancouver residents will know that is Terminal 1. There's a current public dock there. So that dock may move. So we know that for Vancouver, we need to wait until they figure out the I-5 bridge replacement and where that ferry dock is going to go. But we have ample docks already available to include for the pilot project. The start of Frog Ferry will be between Cathedral Park, there are currently 3 docks there, down to River Place, which has a beautiful dock. It needs very little work done on it. Many of your viewers will remember that was old Newport Bay Restaurant. It's been sitting there empty for about 14 years. why not activate and use that resource, that infrastructure that taxpayers have already paid for, and get people out of their cars and using the ferry and
So
that infrastructure.
yeah, and the infrastructure that's already there, as you mentioned, I definitely remember the old Newport Bay restaurant that was down there. So, once this is, once you got going with this, how many people are we talking about? You mentioned these are smaller, like foot ferries or bike ferries. We're not talking about something like what's up in Seattle. We're going to have a ton of cars on these. So, how many people can you transport? How many ferries would be on the river? How would that all work?
Yeah, so we'll be starting off with these double-hulled catamarans, and they have space for 70 passengers. Further down the road, we'll have a slightly larger vessel that will have the capacity for 100 passengers on there. So we're very conservative when we come to our estimates. We don't want to over forecast. We like to kind of under promise and over deliver. So just running one boat 6 days a week, that's 780 passengers a day. That's 600 autos removed from the roadways per day. That's based on just a 50% occupancy rate. And just that one vessel would displace about 3,200 annual metric tons of carbon emissions.
So definitely on the climate end, it sounds like this would be, you've done the studies there, that this would definitely be beneficial on that end. Now, as far as people utilizing it, are you seeing this as a daily commuter kind of thing? Is it more of a tourism thing? Is it a recreational, like what kind of use cases would people be hopping on this ferry for?
Well, it's all of the above, but looking at other river cities, really the business model is on commuters. So you've got around the year. Typically, for other river cities, there's an uptick of about 30 to 50% in the summer months when tourists come out to use it. So we just want that really conservative business case of those commuters. And we specifically have looked at Cathedral Park. They really want us. They don't have great transit solutions right now. And transiting from the North Peninsula down to like OHSU or even to River Place to go to PSU for students is about 25 minutes versus an hour on transit.
So cutting down on time, certainly, for something like that,
Yeah.
for a commute. Well, where are we at now? Now, I know this has been an initiative that's been going on for a while, for a few years, I believe, and you can obviously correct me on that as far as how long you've been pushing for this, but funding seems to have been something that's been a bit of an issue. So let's kind of go into that side and figure out how is it that you're trying to get this implemented, and what are some of the obstacles?
Yeah, so we've been at this for 6 years. This month actually marks our anniversary on it. And when you ask about funding, it is it's interesting to respond to because there are unprecedented amounts of federal dollars being made available just for passenger ferries. The Federal Transportation Administration has made available over $300 million per year. That's under the infrastructure bill. So we're in year 2 of that. The U.S. Department of Energy has huge grant monies coming out for shoreside charging infrastructure. The feds are they're having a difficult time, shoveling out all that money. Our concern is Portland and Oregon, how much are we really applying for those funds, especially given our high tax burden here? So in terms of funding, we do need a local match. Nearly all transit projects in our region have a 50-50 match of local to federal. The ferry lobby is so strong, however, that it's an 80-20 match of 80% federal and 20% local. Sometimes it's even 90-10. So it's unprecedented in transit when you have such a huge percentage of that being made available and funded through the feds. We're not very good at that here in Portland and the region, and applying for ferry funds and applying for competitive funds, period. We just don't do a whole lot of it. So that's why we, as this little nonprofit grassroots effort, are coming in and saying, why not tap into this money that's available? We'll do a lot of the burden. We'll do a lot of the work. We know there's not gobs of money to be made in out of this. If we wanted to make gobs of money, we would have privatized this and we would charge higher ticket prices, and it would be priced so the only people that could afford tickets could do it. We want this to be a public transit system, and that's why we want federal dollars. just by the very nature of that, is then you've got the public money that's coming out, and the subsidies for the operational side of this is very low for ferries.
I want to get into that a little bit more, but you mentioned the ticket price. So let's actually kind of talk about that for a second. So what would this be for a typical price for somebody saying wanting to commute from like Cathedral Park to River Place?
So we've got $3.50. It would be half that for honored citizens, and children would ride for free. And that's actually a national transit requirement that if you take in public funds, then your honored citizen ticket price is 50% of that cost. So again, we want this to be available for everyone. We just think this is kind of the cornerstone to a healthy community and making sure North Peninsula residents living up in Cathedral Park and St. John's and other neighboring neighborhoods are able to afford and even perhaps live car free and transit down to the downtown core and to their jobs or to school or to their doctor's appointments.
If going back to the funding side, to get back into that, you're talking about the city of Portland, or just not being here, where we have not been very good, according to you, like of funding these kinds of projects, funding a ferry. So where are you at with that now? And I know there's a renewed effort. If you could talk about that, what it is that you're trying to do to get those fundings, and what are the obstacles that are happening to make that happen?
Right. Well, this project is essentially shovel ready. For 6 years, we've done all the studies that those public agencies and city council have asked us to do. We've gone out, we've raised the money, we've done the work in conjunction with them. No one is questioning the validity, any of the outcomes of it. But we need for them to work with us on the local match. And 2 years ago, Portland City Council approved and agreed to work with us on a federal grant request. It was a 5-0 vote. So we did the work. We received no compensation for it, but the feds came back and said, we're not going to award you the work. And we had a meeting with them, and there were members of PBOT there, and city council members, staff were there. And they said, hey, we love the project. We like the team behind it. We like the premise. We love the community served. The part we don't like is the fact that the city was merely passed through, that they weren't truly involved in any of the project oversight, and there wasn't a match. So, come back to us, have them do that. So we're not going to, so that's where the issue is right now, is city council help us. If you either fund it out of the city's budget, and the city will be adopting their budget for next fiscal year this June, or go out with us to different corporate sponsors and some foundations. They're out there, we know who they are, but we need to have meaningful champions. It's city council to say, Frog Ferry, we know you're doing 98% of the work. We're just going to stand with you and help you get over this hump. But we have done all of this fundraising for 6 years, and now we've got some of these fairly significant potential funding sources saying, we will blink and we will have that conversation when we see city council get serious about it. And that's what we're asking for.
And what's your timeline on that?
So really, it's now through the end of June. We know the FTA will come out with their next grant opening sometime in June. It's typically due right around the 1st of September. Nobody knows until it actually comes out, but city council knows that as well. But candidly, we're not going to just hang out for another year without any funding like we have for the past couple of years, continuing to do the work on behalf of the public. I mean, we exist. We got our 501c3 designation because we're doing the work a public agency isn't. So we've been happy to do that for the betterment of the city of Portland, but now city council has to want this as much as we do. And they now have a climate action plan. And we would go a long way getting people out of cars if we were to go ahead and adopt this. And also in terms of community resilience, we're now in the comprehensive economic development strategy for the region that was adopted this last year. Frog Ferry's in there for a passenger ferry service. And listen, the city has had a passenger ferry service in its plan for over 20 years. This isn't like something new or novel. It's just that we've been helping the city move it ahead. They had the operational feasibility study in their budget 6 years ago. They took it out. We did it. And now here we are 2.5 years later. We're going to present it to city council in a few weeks. It's just that they're moving very, very slowly. We believe there needs to be a greater sense of urgency given where we are with climate and the propensity of a natural disaster. It's time. We've done everything we can now. We haven't asked for much. It's time for them to step up and partner.
And you said that presentation's in a few weeks.
It is. Right now it's slated for May 24th before City Council.
Well, Susan, would love to follow up with you after that too, to see where we're at and what happens with City Council, and what happens with Frog Ferry, and just to see what happens right there. So I want to say thank you very much for joining us too to talk about this and kind of cover and get a little more in-depth discussion going about Frog Ferry and what you've been doing there. And for anybody who wants to follow up with more information and find out about it, where would be the best place to go?
They can go to our website. It's just frogferry.com, or they can email me directly at susan@frogferry.com.
All right. Well, Susan, thank you very much for being here on Fox 12 Now.
Greg, thank you. I appreciate it.
And for everybody joining in, again, thank you for joining us as well. So this is Fox 12 Now. This is our digital desk. This is something new that we're doing here, so you can kind of get used to that. If you're watching wherever you are, however you found us, bookmark it, save it. Keep that in mind that we'll be bringing you all kinds of coverage here, in-depth news coverage on stories that maybe you already know about, some you don't know about. We'll have breaking news, all kinds of things happening here as we're getting this launched. But have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Greg Nibbler with Fox 12 Oregon.